Hello everyone and welcome to Sharded, an Argent Saga podcast. I'm Andrew, coming at you solo today for our very first episode of How Stuff Works. Hey guys, welcome back to Sharded. This is episode 7. So as we've been learning and playing, of course, play scenarios have come up where we haven't known the answer. We've had to go out and research things. We've also learned things as we've gone. And the purpose of the How Stuff Works episode really is to go through play scenarios, how they work with the rules, and also just how some card interactions work. So the first one I want to start with actually is, this is actually not in the official rules, it's in the floor rules for tournaments. 4.3 is field layout. So the way that those playmats and the little playmat that you get in the intro deck is laid out is actually required at high-level tournaments that you have it laid out that way. So you should really just get in the habit. It doesn't matter whether you're left-handed, right-handed, or whatever. There are some exceptions made, of course, for disabilities if needed, but by and large, you should really just get in the habit of having everything in that layout, right? I'll show the layout here that everyone should be expected to. It should not be a surprise to you, but it was a surprise to us, and I want to thank the viewer for pointing out that it is actually floor enforceable, judge enforceable. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is attacks and guardians and how that works. Now, the reason this one is worth discussing is because a lot of people coming to Argent Saga have other gaming backgrounds, specifically with Magic. And the way that this works is not the same as you would in Magic. So just to back up for those who aren't familiar, right? The way it works in Magic is if you declare an attack, once your opponent responds and blocks one of your characters, or your creatures, sorry, once one of your creatures becomes blocked, that creature is considered to have been blocked for the rest of the turn, regardless of what happens to the blocking creature thereafter, right? If you somehow blow him up or remove him from play, the attacking creature is still blocked. And ultimately, fundamentally, that's actually not the way it works in Argent Saga. So it's very worth going through this just to make it clear for those coming from this other game. Right, so let's go ahead and flash up this game scenario. You go to combat, which is 8.1.2 in the rules. You attack with your Wyvern Rider. Maybe you put him in, he's got quickness, not really relevant. You're attacking with some unit. And then you exhaust it, of course, and declare that you're attacking towers. A priority sequence then occurs, right? You have the opportunity to do something. Your opponent can respond, of course. Next, the defending player, let's say they have the Argent egg in play. They will exhaust the Argent egg as guardian to block. Okay, so they have now redirected that attack from your towers to the Argent egg. And then a priority sequence occurs. You have a chance to react, and then they have a chance to react. Right? So if in that priority sequence, let's say you play Molten Explosion or any other type of instacast that can do damage to the Argent egg. Right? So in this case, we're playing Molten Explosion. We deal 2,000, which is plenty to the Argent egg. Destroy it. It pops out a Rao unit token. Not relevant, though, because Guardian phase is already passed. Also, Rao unit token does not have Guardian. But now, what's very interesting and different than the scenario we talked about before is, as long as the attacking unit remains in play under your control, you then move to the damage step, and that's 8.2.6 in the rules. Because the Guardian unit was removed from the field prior to going to the damage step, the Wyvern Rider then proceeds to hit a tower. Right? So even though the Wyvern Rider, say that 3 times fast, even though the unit was blocked originally, or guardianed originally, because the blocking unit was removed from play before it moved to damage, the target continues on to its original, or the attacker continues on to its original target. So next I want to move on to tower effects. We're actually going to run through 2 scenarios here, right? So just bringing up everyone up to speed. We're all aware that when a tower is destroyed, that effect does not go into the queue. It happens immediately, right? So there's 2 very interesting things that can happen out of this. Okay, so again, that's rule 12.9.4 is that effects from towers do not use the queue, do not target, and apply immediately after the tower is destroyed by resolving an effect or game mechanic. So basically what that means is it happens and there's no response that you can do to save it. So one scenario that came up in a game that we were playing was the Twilight Knight, and it actually was the Twilight Knight who has Destroyer, right? When a unit attacks a tower, it attacks 2 towers instead. So what came up was, because he's attacking both simultaneously, and the destroyed effects do not go into a queue, there must be a queue because there's 2 simultaneous effects, right? So the very simple answer to this is the tower controller will choose the order of the tower resolutions. So in the effect here, because this was actually the scenario that happened, was he popped the air tower and he popped the dark tower. So I was able to bounce his guy to his hand and then look at his hand and discard it, because I got to choose the hour or the order of those resolutions. All right, the next one has to deal with Yuki. All right, so I want to go ahead and read Yuki out. So she has target attack. If this card is in your hand after one of your towers is destroyed, put this card into play. So the effect that this is relevant to what we're talking about is the water tower. When this tower is destroyed, you can draw 2 cards. Because you cannot respond, and it does not go in the queue, to the water tower being destroyed. If you draw one of the 2 cards that you draw from the water tower is Yuki, you can actually play Yuki, because the reason is the tower effect occurs immediately, and then when your chance to react occurs, you actually have Yuki in your hand, right? So if by chance your tower of water gets blown up and you draw Yuki, you can put her into play. Very, very cool. All right, this next one came up as a question on my own when I was doing deck building. As many of you know, I have kind of gravitated towards Eitan. I have a lot of experience playing him, or he's at least been the guy I've been playing the most. And he has a very interesting ability, of course, which is pay 1 and sack one of your units, and then you can play an air unit for 1 greater. So the question I had actually related to Ariana and Kala, right? Ariana, basically, if you have Kala in play, if Ariana is destroyed, you can destroy Kala instead. He essentially takes the hit for her. So the question I had was, could I Eitan Ariana and then take the hit with Kala? The answer is no. And the reason is 12.5.2 in the comprehensive rules, a sacrificed card is not considered to be destroyed, right? So obviously this won't work. You sacrifice Ariana. It does not trigger the Kala thing because she was not destroyed. She was sacrificed. So that's a big fat no right there. All right, so another point of confusion can actually come from bouncing of unit tokens, right? So we all know that in order to get to a lot of then effects, the previous effect would have had to have happened, right? So let's say in the case of Hurricane Shot, as an additional cost to play this card, return an air unit from your field to its owner's hand. Destroy target unit, cost 4 or less. Now, this isn't necessarily applicable because, you'd have to have a green token and all that, but just stick with me, right? The idea here is what we're doing is in order to play the card, we have to bounce a unit to our hand. The question is, we know that a token cannot be bounced to your hand itself. So do you fulfill the cost effectively of playing that card with having it not into your hand? So the game scenario again is card requires bouncing a unit as an additional cost. Token unit goes to hand and stop existing. So the question is, was the unit returned to your hand? Has the cost been paid? And the answer here is, in order for the unit to stop existing, it must have moved zones, and therefore it was returned to hand, right? In order for it to have stopped existing, it had to go to the hand, so it was returned to the hand. So you can indeed return a token as part of paying a cost for like a bounce. All right, so this next item, again, I want to come back to playing Eitan and something that you can do in interaction specifically with the Skytree Blockadeship. Right, so this actually happened in a game with Mike, and he's like, no, I don't think it works that way, and it actually does. So I wanted to walk through the way that Eitan and Skytree work, right? So what I'm flashing up here is the game scenario. So let's say your opponent goes to combat, declares an attacker and exhausts him, and then declares the attack target. Okay, simple enough. In the priority sequence then, you can Eitan, let's say you have the Great Hawk out, a 3-cost unit, any 3-cost unit out, this will work, right? You can Eitan and pay 1. You can then drop the blockade ship. And then you can, because the attack has already been declared, you can actually then use the blockade ship to guardian the attacking unit. Now, what is interesting to note here is specifically this blockade ship has the ability that the opposing units cannot attack. However, at this point that you're dropping the blockade ship, the attack has already been declared. So placement of the blockade ship does not matter to the attacking unit in this instance. However, if your opponent had other units on the board, you could in theory stop 2 attacks effectively, right? You could guardian 1 and then prevent the other unit from attacking because you would be placed in front of them. Okay, so after your guy enters play, you proceed to the guardian step where the blockade ship can now guardian. And then combat proceeds, and with that 2504 surprise, hopefully you can blow somebody up. All right, so the next one I want to talk about is cost versus cost to play. All right, so 3.4 in the rules, actually 3.41, says a card's shard-like cost is the amount of shards you must exhaust to play it. This number is located in the top left corner of spells, augments, and units. And then in 9.4.7, if multiple effects would modify the cost or requires an additional action, apply them in the following order. If a card is being played at shard-like costs, consider its cost to play and be modified. Okay, so I won't go through the rest, but what this really boils down to is that cost and cost to play are different things, right? The cost of a card never changes, right? A 3-cost card is always 3. However, you can affect the cost to play it, right? So why does this matter? All right, so let's put up this example. So game scenario here, let's use Eitan again, right? Obviously my boy. If you have the Skyship Engineer and the Sandsea Traveler in play, right? So why this might be relevant is the Skyship Engineer, you can exhaust, bounce into your hand to make airships cost 1 less. And then of course with Eitan, we could in theory play with 1 available, we could play a 3-drop, killing the Traveler and playing a 3-drop. So the question is, can you bounce the Engineer to reduce by 1 and then Eitan to play a 4-cost airship? The answer is no. And the reason is that Eitan refers to the cost of the card and not the cost to play. So no matter what, the Engineer reduction is irrelevant because Eitan is looking at the printed cost on the card, not the cost to play the airship. Right, so this may apply in another scenario here. So let's say you have Skyship Engineer and then the new card, Raging Shard Beast, right? So the Shard Beast prevents playing of cards with cost of 3 or more. The Engineer can exhaust to reduce the cost to play of airships by 1. So by the argument we made just before, can the Engineer exhaust bounce to reduce airships by 1, allowing for the play of a 3-drop airship? Now, granted, I'm aware there's no 3-drop airships. We're just using this as an example. But the answer here ultimately is no. The Shard Beast refers to the cost that is printed on the card, which is the cost of the card, not the cost to play. All right, so this next one is actually kind of building off of what we just talked about. So we're talking about play versus put into play, and these are 2 very important distinctions, right? So let's again use the scenario where we have the Raging Shard Beast in play. This prevents playing of cards with cost 3 or more. However, if you have a Yuki in hand, when one of your towers, I have the air tower here, but that's not relevant, right? It's just what we used before. But again, Yuki allows for putting her into play when one of your towers is destroyed. Of course, the Shard Beast says you cannot play a 3-drop unit. However, if one of your towers is destroyed, you can put Yuki into play because the Shard Beast prevents playing of the card, not putting it into play. Very frustrating difference there. I can totally grant that from a new player standpoint, but it's just some nuance effects, right? Can you play Yuki? No. Can you put Yuki into play? The answer is yes. I totally grant that it's confusing. I totally grant that that may be frustrating, but that is the way it works and you should be aware of that. Right, to that end, you have Raging Shard Beast in play, right? We'll look at another scenario here. You have Raging Shard Beast in play again. Shard Beast prevents playing of cards with cost 3 or more. You now have Skytree Blockadeship, cost 4 in hand, and we have the Great Hawk of Cloudsea in play, just pretty much the one we were looking at before. Can I Eitan to get that 4-cost dropship in play, right? Of course, we will assume that the Great Hawk had been either Eitaned in or had been played previously the Shard Beast hitting, so there's no conflict there. But the question is, can I Eitan my 3 to put into play my 4? Based on what we already talked about with Yuki, the answer is of course yes. Eitan puts the card into play as per his text. Shard Beast prevents playing the card, not putting it into play. All right, guys, so that's it for today, running through all the various scenarios and various clarifications that we have for today. What I'd be interested in knowing is, do you guys have other interesting things that you think should be shared or that we should touch on, or other questions that you'd have that you'd like addressed? If so, please let us know. This is something we'll be doing from time to time, not on a regular basis, probably once a quarter or so, as we just have enough to actually make an episode out of it. Okay, but in the meantime, if you like what we're doing, please like and subscribe, give us those clicks, and if nothing else, go Commando.